Chicago Bears legend Devin Hester was once again snubbed for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and his path to Canton doesn't look much easier next year either.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. On the show today, we look at Devin Hester's Hall of Fame candidacy, remind ourselves why he belongs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We compare him to the guys who made it ahead of him this year and why he belongs ahead of at least two of them, if not maybe three. And we look ahead to what it might look like next year with another strong class that's going to make it tough for Hester to get in the immediate future. We've had the conversation before on the podcast, but every time we get a new Pro Football Hall of Fame class without Devin Hester in it, it's another reminder of him deserving to be in and feeling a little bit slighted by him not getting in. And it's not to say that the other players that get in are not Hall of Fame worthy players, but it's a matter of who deserves to get in how soon. And we'll get into some of the comparisons one-to-one, but I want to start with Devin Hester's own resume, because we so often in sports don't properly appreciate greatness because we're always trying to compare it to either the next great thing or the last great thing. You think about this a lot with LeBron James and Michael Jordan in the NBA, where, we compare LeBron and Jordan so much that we don't properly appreciate LeBron for what he's doing right now, regardless of how you feel about him versus Michael Jordan. That's a separate conversation. But like with Devin Hester, let's make sure we realize how special he was and how much we appreciated and how special it was just to watch what he was able to do throughout his NFL career, mostly with the Chicago Bears, but still was pretty good for at least a year in Atlanta and had another season in Baltimore after that. And that's part of the Hall of Fame resume there, is a certain amount of longevity. Like, he was in the NFL for a full 10 years, and maybe he wasn't Hall of Fame caliber all 10 years, but he was a long-standing, effective punt and kick returner, a special punt and kick returner, to the point where you're talking, year 8, his last year in Chicago, was the year he had the most kickoff return yards of any of his seasons. Like, when we think of Devin Hester being maybe past his prime by 2013, we're talking a Mark Trestman year with Devin Hester still there. He had a career-high 52 kickoff returns for 1,400 yards, and including an 80-yard return. Didn't have a kickoff return touchdown that season, but this is a guy who's approaching his age 30 season and still a dynamic difference maker as a kickoff return man. Still had a punt return touchdown that season, goes to Atlanta the year after, has a punt return touchdown that year as well. Still a 1,000-yard kickoff return man. He was doing this for an extended period of time. He didn't hit 28, 29 and the speed falls off and he just disappears. Eventually it did tail off, as every player does, but he did it for an extended period of time and holds several NFL records. We know that, but I think it's important to acknowledge, combined special teams return touchdown in his career, 14 punts, 5 kickoffs, one missed field goal. That's also the NFL record for most non-offensive touchdowns scored. You take out the missed field goal, and he has the record for most kickoff and punt returns combined. Obviously, the record then for most punt return touchdowns in a career, most punt return touchdowns in a season, most kickoff return touchdowns in a game with 2 in that Bears-Rams game in December of 2006. Most combined return touchdowns in a season, most combined return touchdowns in a game. He did it twice with 2 in one game. Most combined return touchdowns as a rookie, the rookie record in 2006. Most non-offensive touchdowns in a season with 6. And of course, the fastest touchdown in Super Bowl history with the Super Bowl right around the corner, 14 seconds in, that opening kickoff against the Indianapolis Colts. And that stands out to me too, because when you think about guys' Hall of Fame resume, usually, it's more than just the pure stats. Like, you want a story and you want big moments. And not only do you have regular season big moments, late against the Arizona Cardinals to put the Bears over the top and to have these big comeback opportunities, that he was instrumental in actually winning and deciding football games for this team. But you also have the Super Bowl moment, the one play from that game that everybody knows. There was a pick 6 or whatever that Rex Grossman threw. Like, there were other, highlight plays in that game. But if you ask the average football fan who's not a Bears fan, who just watches the NFL, what's the most memorable play of that Super Bowl against the Colts? Oh, it's Devin Hester's opening kickoff return for a touchdown, right? Like, he had the big moments. He has the NFL record. He has the longevity. And he's a guy that we saw thrive even as the NFL changed the rules to make his job more difficult, and changed the rules in part because he was so good at what he was doing. Like, that's the epitome of what you look for in a Hall of Fame football player, a player who changed the game, a player who had memorable moments, a player who set NFL records, and a player who did it for a long time at a higher level than anybody else in the league at the time, and really anybody else in NFL history. Cordero Patterson, maybe the overall kickoff return counterpart to Devin Hester's punt return prowess. Deion Sanders had some moments there. Deion Sanders, a Hall of Fame player, and it's pretty clear Devin Hester is on that level as a return man, better as a return man, and belongs in the Hall of Fame as well. It's about the opportunity he gets and just the limited number of guys that you can fit in each class, right? You get 5, I think, or is it 7? I forget the exact number of. This year's class, it's 5, modern players plus a coach, and then 3, senior players that get added in. And it's a matter of how does he compare against the other guys? He's not that he isn't perhaps worthy, but can he be one of the 5 most worthy in any individual class? And I feel like when you look at this year's class, you can make some pretty strong arguments that he belongs at least somewhere in this group of 5. We'll kind of make the Hester comparison to this year's class and then turn our attention to the future and look like what his opportunities might look like next year. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Blue Nile. Valentine's Day is coming up, which means romance is in the air more than usual. And I don't need to tell all of you out there that your Valentine's Day plans probably already on the calendar, or else you're really, really far behind. But do you have that perfect Valentine's Day gift just yet? Because whether you're just celebrating the day of romance or you're ready maybe to pop the question, make the big move, you can find jewelry as unique as your partner with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has the perfect piece of jewelry for life's special moments, or if you're ready to create that custom engagement ring of your dreams. They've got simple online tools to let you choose the diamond shape, the size, the clarity, the setting style, everything you need with Blue Nile's bench jewelers, then handcrafting the perfect piece right to your specifications. If you need help, they've got expert guidance, in-depth educational materials, and online tools that put you in complete control. So don't worry about the hassle of going to the jewelry store and dealing with all that process, and focus on the romance. You don't have to worry about the price either, because Blue Nile has a diamond price guarantee that lets you compare a competitor's diamond against one of theirs, and Blue Nile can meet or even beat their price. Every order is insured. It arrives quickly in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside, with free shipping and free returns. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com to save 50% off. That's BlueNile.com. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by our partners at FanDuel, the official sports, or one of the official sportsbook partners of the NFL, America's #1 sportsbook, and our official sportsbook partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're really excited to have them on board, and they've got a bunch of great features that make betting on sports fun and easy, especially for Super Bowl 57. Download FanDuel right now so you can place a bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. That's right, they will make sure you got nothing to worry about, because you'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. It's a win-win. Either your bet wins or your bet doesn't, and they give you up to $3,000 back in bonus bets to get your money back and to keep playing. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to all sorts of props on who's going to score touchdowns, how many yards they're going to have, and so much more. Their app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And I love looking up all around all the different ways I can play and win with FanDuel. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I don't want to be critical of the players that were inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame this year in place of Devin Hester. I don't mean this to be an opportunity to tear them down and to make them seem like bad players or guys that aren't worthy, because it's a strong class, right? Rondé Barber, Darrelle Revis, Joe Thomas, Zach Thomas, DeMarcus Ware are the five like modern era players. And then, of course, the coach, Don Coryell, and the senior players, Chuck Howley, John Klecko, and Ken Riley. Like, I don't want to take away anything from them. They all had accomplished careers. They don't induct players into the Hall of Fame that aren't good, that are bad players or just like straight up not worthy of making the Hall of Fame. I'm not here to make the argument that any of those guys are not Hall of Fame caliber players. It's a question of, should all five of those players be in ahead of Devin Hester? If you're going to make the line of like, okay, who deserves to be in first? Who deserves to be in ahead of the other people? Because you can only put five in at a time. Who should be the first five in of the available pool of Hall of Famers? And I can't help but look at that list and feel like Devin Hester belongs ahead of at least one of them. I think at least two of them I could feel like I can make the argument for. And from there, we can nitpick. And I think, it's split from there. And again, I want to make this clear. All five of those guys, very good football players. I look at that list and I say, for sure, Darrelle Revis, yes. Like, Darrelle Revis is a Hall of Fame player. I like the Hall of Fame criteria. We talked about it with Devin, right? Like, having some longevity of success, having big moments, maybe changing the rules, NFL records, and the other one that we hear a lot, like sort of anecdotally, is like, can you tell the story of the NFL without this player, right? Can you accurately talk about what happened in their era of playing without including them in that conversation? I think Devin Hester is a guy who you can't talk about the NFL from 2006 to 2016, especially not like 2006 to 2012, 13, 14-ish, without Devin Hester. Like, he's a critical part of what happened in the league over that time as the rules changed, and he set the records and had longevity and continued success. I think that's the case for Darrelle Revis, undoubtedly. Like, Revis Island was a thing. He was pretty close to a household name over that era. You knew that Darrelle Revis would shut down a wide receiver. You would put him on man coverage on one side of the field, and that side of the field was just locked down for an extended period of time. No doubt, like Darrelle Revis, I think of as a guy head and shoulders ahead of Devin Hester. I think Rondé Barber is also pretty well in that conversation. He's the only guy in the NFL history that has 40 interceptions and 25 sacks, a bunch of franchise records for the Buccaneers. Like, he was a little bit some of his prime was a little bit before my time as a younger person here. Like, I don't have memories of that 2002 Super Bowl team, but like, he was one of the best defensive backs in football. And he was a playmaker. He was consistent, had the longevity, had the turnovers, was able to get after the quarterback as a blitzer as well. Like, Rondé Barber is like legitimately an all-time great cornerback, and I don't want to take that away from him. And I feel like, yeah, I'm good with Rondé Barber and Darrelle Revis getting in ahead of Devin Hester. I don't feel as strongly that way about particularly Zach Thomas and DeMarcus Ware. Not that those are not great football players. They are both Hall of Fame caliber football players. But if we start nitpicking who belongs in sooner, Devin Hester or Zach Thomas, Devin Hester or DeMarcus Ware, like, I feel like you can tell the story of the NFL over that era without DeMarcus Ware. Like, DeMarcus Ware, a very, very good pass rusher, a guy you could rely on. I mean, he's 115, 117 sacks in his career. And I think that's the most in Cowboys history. But like, it's what I think like 9th most in NFL. So he hit 138.5 career sacks, 9th most in NFL history. That's very impressive. But like, is 9th most in NFL history like a guy you can't tell the story of the NFL in? Like, he had a bunch of sacks for the Cowboys, but those Cowboys teams were always kind of underachievers, right? I mean, it's like the Jason Garrett era and the Tony Romo era. Like, they made the playoffs, but they weren't ever like a big-time Super Bowl team. He didn't get a Super Bowl ring until he went to Denver in 2014 with Peyton Manning. And they had that was a very good defense, but it wasn't like, he was an important part of a Super Bowl team and a great regular season player, but like, did he have the moments, right? Did he have, the game changing, like the story of the NFL? Can you tell it without DeMarcus Ware? Like, he was one of the best pass rushers of his era, but like, he was one of, right? That's kind of the thing. Like, Devin Hester was one of one. He wasn't one of the best kick returners. He was the best kick returner. Eric Weems had some returns, like Josh Cribbs had some returns, but he was head and shoulders above the rest. DeMarcus Ware was one of the best, and maybe at times he was the best, but he wasn't like always the best. There were a lot of really good pass rushers in his era that maybe also belong in the Hall of Fame, and it didn't feel like DeMarcus Ware stands head and shoulders above the rest. Same kind of conversation with Zach Thomas. Great career with the Miami Dolphins. Had a bunch of tackles, like an insane amount of tackles, and already like really, a well-regarded linebacker. But like, he was never like the best linebacker. He wasn't like the guy who was changing the game. He was just really good at what he did and belongs in the Hall of Fame. But I don't think he belongs in the Hall of Fame ahead of Devin Hester. He was one of these guys that was waiting for a long time too, and I still feel like maybe he should still be waiting because a guy like Hester is not in. I've specifically omitted Joe Thomas here because I do think it's tough with Thomas because he was on the Browns his whole career, but he was really good and an Iron Man. And I think I find myself feeling like Joe Thomas probably ahead of Hester. But Zach Thomas and DeMarcus Ware, I'm less sold on those guys being like, oh, you got to get them in. Sorry, Devin, you got to wait because these are just 5 guys that are just for sure head and shoulders above what Devin Hester can bring. And that's why I'm like, it feels like a snub because it's not just like, 5 clearly, this is not Tom Brady, J.J. Watt, Aaron Rodgers all retiring at the same time. Like, yeah, those guys, when they're eligible for the Hall of Fame or whatever, like, those are clear, like, first ballot, got to be in there right away guys. DeMarcus Ware, Zach Thomas, I feel like Devin Hester's a guy I put in ahead of them, and I'm not going to push the envelope on Joe Thomas, Darrelle Revis, or Rondé Barber in that regard. So Devin has to wait another year, at least, because you look ahead at who's eligible next year, plus some of the lingering guys that still need to get in besides Devin, and it's going to be another path next year, but I still think he's got a pretty good shot. We'll look at the upcoming 2024 class and how Devin compares to those guys next year, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by TurboTax. This year, go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with a tax expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. It's about doing anything but taxes. You can show your eyes things that are not taxes. You can unpack a moving box of not taxes. You can taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope that not taxes sleeps through the night. or grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. It feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax. Full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. There are no guarantees for Devin Hester's Pro Football Hall of Fame chances next season or even the year beyond, because you look at this 2024 Hall of Fame class, and it feels to me kind of like what we saw this year in 2023. There are a couple guys next year that become eligible that I think are pretty much head and shoulders clearly like, yeah, they got to be in. Sorry, Devin, you have to wait for these guys because those guys are just deserving. And then you've got a handful of other guys that are like, I think more neck and neck, kind of like we talk about, like kind of like in the Zach Thomas range, in the same range as a DeMarcus Ware, players who deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But do they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame ahead of Devin Hester? So to me, two guys for sure, put them in. Sorry, Devin, you got to wait for Julius Peppers, former Chicago Bears teammate, Julius Peppers, but of course, great career with the Carolina Panthers before that and went on a little bit beyond them. I mean, we saw Julius Peppers firsthand. Like, that's a guy who needs to be in the Hall of Fame, right? I mean, he was a 9-time Pro Bowler, had 160 career sacks, just a dominant player week in and week out. And it feels to me like I think of Julius Peppers as more dominant than DeMarcus Ware. Maybe that's not fair, but in my head, I kind of feel a certain level of like presence that Julius Peppers made. Maybe there's a bias there to the kind of impact he had in Chicago. The other one is Antonio Gates, one of the best tight ends in NFL history. First all-time among tight ends with 116 touchdowns, and third among tight end in receiving yards with over 11,800. Like, yeah, that guy is one of the best at his position of all time. Like, he's Antonio Gates, an all-time tight end. Julius Peppers, I think, a top-flight pass rusher that feels like a guy who's probably going to be a first-ballot guy, who needs to be probably a first-ballot guy, and a guy I would put in ahead of Devin Hester for his individual accomplishments and the impact he had on the NFL. He feels more important to the story of the NFL than DeMarcus Ware in my mind. But that's not the most important argument of this podcast, but that's kind of where I stand with those guys. From there, feels like Devin is kind of next on the list because there's like a handful of guys in this cluster that are all very good, probably Hall of Fame worthy players, but not so clearly more worthy of getting in ahead of Devin Hester. It's the safety Eric Berry from the Kansas City Chiefs. It's the nose tackle Haloti Ngata from the Baltimore Ravens. It's the wide receiver Brandon Marshall of Miami, Denver, Chicago Bears, and I feel like he bounced around somewhere else late in his career. Chiefs running back Jamal Charles and Green Bay Packers wide receiver Jordy Nelson, who of course finished with the Raiders. Like, all of those guys have very strong candidacies for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. All perennial Pro Bowlers, all big-time difference makers at their positions. Many of them had significant playoff experience and made some big plays and did some things in football that not a lot of guys could do. All very good players. But like, none of those guys jump out at me as like, oh, clearly should be ahead of Devin Hester. You can make some arguments there about, Brandon Marshall was really good on a number of different teams and had 1,500-yard plus seasons and a bunch of touchdowns and never had the playoff success, but was always a guy you had to account for on the field. Jordy Nelson won a Super Bowl with the Packers and was just like all reliable and had great connection with two Hall of Fame Packers quarterbacks. And like a lot of times, those kind of receivers make it into the Hall of Fame. Like, he just had that longevity and that staying power there. Eric Berry and Jamal Charles, I think, had shorter peaks, not as much of the like super longevity, but at their peaks, they were instrumental to some really successful Kansas City Chiefs team. And those were like high-end, top-of-the-line players at their position. And Haloti Ngata was just always a threat on the interior. Just an insane defensive lineman who could just kick butt year in and year out and did it for a very long time. All very good players. And there's a number of other guys that become eligible, but those guys are like the next tier. I'd throw Brian Arakpos in there, Josh Sitton, Kyle Williams, Max Unger, even the kicker Phil Dawson. Some of these guys have, Sebastian Janikowski might be in that conversation. Andrew Luck, an interesting one eligible for the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he played long enough, right? Those are all guys that are really good. And I'm not here to tear them down either and say, oh, well, this, Eric Berry wasn't very good or Jamal Charles wasn't very good. It's not about like them not being good players worthy of accolades. But like we made Devin Hester's case at the beginning, right? Like, do their resumes clearly surpass Devin Hester as why they should belong in the Hall of Fame? Like, those guys don't have the NFL records that Devin Hester does. Those guys weren't like, none of those guys I mentioned, Nada, Charles, Berry, Marshall, none of those guys were ever the best player in the NFL at their position. Antonio Gates was. I put him in a separate category. Julius Peppers, maybe, I put those two in a separate category. But the rest of those guys, like, not head and shoulders above the rest of the competition at their spots. They didn't have the rules changed for them or around them and still succeed in spite of those rules. I don't know that they had quite the same iconic moments as Devin Hester either. And so it's just sort of like the preemptive argument for like why he should get in next year and why if he gets snubbed, like those guys shouldn't be in ahead of them. I know there are other players who are also waiting their turns who we can start to have some of these arguments about too, and we could spend hours going through every Hall of Fame eligible player and put them all head to head, and we could probably power rank all the Hall of Fame eligible players and figure out where Devin Hester belongs in those power rankings. But I still contend, like, you're not adding such a robust class next year of first ballot eligible guys. There's two that I put ahead of him. So like there's three other guys that have to get in next year. And if Peppers and Gates are going to be two of them, Hester should be one of the next three. Here's hoping we get that done. Here's hoping the Hall of Fame voters eventually get him in and give him the due justice, and not justice, but just accolades and recognition and acknowledgement that he absolutely deserves. We'll be pulling for him here on the Locked On Bears podcast. I hope you will be as well. Let me know what you think about him getting snubbed, who you think he should have got in over and who he shouldn't have, whether you agree or not about, the guys we talked about, Revis, Rondé Barber, Zach Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Joe Thomas. You think he should be in over all of them? Do you think those guys all should be in ahead of Hester? Let us know in the comments on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel for this video. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can join the conversation in the Locked On Bears Facebook group as well. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to the Locked On Bears podcast or in the Locked On Bears YouTube channel as well. Leave a comment, like the video, subscribe. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, the Locked On Podcast Network is your team every day, and we break down all your Chicago sports teams. The boys over at Locked On Bulls breaking down a very quiet trade deadline for Chicago, while literally like 28 other teams made trades this season. The Bulls are still kind of sitting there twiddling their thumbs a little bit more and breaking that all down. We got the Cubs, the White Sox, the Blackhawks, and some colleges, Illinois and Northwestern. I think those are the main two Illinois schools right now here with the Locked On Podcast Network. So go check out some of those other Locked On pods. Come on back tomorrow for another episode, on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears. And you have to come on back for your next opportunity to bear down.